All right, so thanks everybody for joining. Looks like we've only got a few people on the call besides the phone team, but it'll still be probably fruitful to have some discussion around some of the new things that have been going on and continue our discussion from last time. So just to introduce myself for the community members on the call, my name is Coleman Moore. Alias on Discourse is Name Locker Room, and I've tried to stay pretty active. I'm just a community member like you guys, trying to get involved however I can, because I feel like this is a pretty special project. So I have done a few things. I aggregated a list of, I guess I'll walk through the agenda first. So let me share my screen. All right, sorry about that. I think I figured it out. So everybody can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the agenda that I put together for the call today. I think first of all, we can discuss some of the TCR parameters. So Caleb framed that discussion pretty well for us. We can talk about goals and metrics. So just so everybody remembers, there's 5 different parameters which we as a community have the ability to control. So I think the best way to kind of empirically look at those is to kind of talk about today what the goals of those parameters should be, how we should set them, kind of what we seek to accomplish. And then we can start talking about metrics to actually study those, to objectively kind of study whether we're hitting those goals in certain ways. After that, and I think that's going to take a little while, but after that, we can pick back up with the community improvement proposals. So, excuse me. Last time we talked about UX stuff. This time, I think we can talk about parameter adjustments and contract upgrades. So I've got a list of the different topics here. I felt like it would be fruitful to organize it a little bit differently. So this time, instead of just being broken out by the different type, it's kind of broken out by ends and means. So kind of what we seek to accomplish. Excuse me, I'm gonna grab a glass of water real quick. And I'm not sure we're gonna get through all of those. But at some point, I'd like to start talking about a foam improvement proposal process. And it looks like, I think from the screen that I was seeing up from Arthur, we actually had a community member put something together around that, which is great to see. But I think that, we definitely need to start thinking about a template for specs for these improvements that we have some sort of consensus around. And then we can maybe talk about how to move things forward after that. So hope that sounds good to everybody. I guess first of all, I introduced myself, but if anybody else wants to introduce themselves, go ahead. I know that some people might just kind of want to listen and learn, but if you want to introduce yourself, go ahead.
Hi guys, I'm Caleb, posting as Foam CS on the Discourse.
Sorry, was someone else trying to speak?
It was probably me. This is Lynn Riley. I was just saying hi.
Hi, Lynn. Thanks for joining.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn.
Okay, hi guys, my name is Katya Zavialova. I think on this course I'm also Katya Zavialova. I'm creative director in Foam, and I work closely on the UX for the Foam map.
Hi everyone, I'm Ryan, one of the co-founders of Foam.
Hi, I'm Arthur. I'm head of growth at Foam.
All right, anybody else? Or we can just get started. We'll get started, and if anybody wants to chime in, obviously, please speak up. This is all about the community here and getting people involved, especially outside of the sort of the core Foam team. So let's just jump into it and, you know, speak up. Like I said, if you have any ideas, contributions, suggestions, etc. But the first thing that I think we can talk about are the TCR parameter adjustments. So like I was saying, there's 5 of those. There's 5 parameters that we as a community can actually vote on. It's not in place yet, but once the governance module is live, we can, as a community, with our Foam tokens, vote to adjust these parameters. So Caleb did a good job, also, like I mentioned, framing this discussion around the parameters, sort of giving us a description of what they are, and then some preliminary ideas around what goals and metrics could be to study whether we're actually doing or hitting what we want to hit by setting those parameters. So, you know, I think it's important that we maybe get some consensus today on goals. We don't necessarily have to know what metric we want to do yet, but that's something that we can certainly discuss as well. So just to, I guess, jump in, here's a list of the parameters. If anybody wants to open up the agenda, you just scroll down and you can find it, but I'll read each one of them. So the first one is the min deposit. And for the people who have been using the map, I'm sure they're aware of what this is. It is the minimum deposit that a user needs in order to stake a point of interest or to challenge a point of interest. So right now that's 50. And I think, you know, mine and Caleb's initial thinking was that the goal here is really to kind of hit a sweet spot where you're setting it, you know, not too high where you're discouraging people from placing POIs because they're worried about their tokens being at risk, but also not too low as to make challenging or voting completely, you know, unprofitable from a user perspective.
I just want to add on like where the current minimum deposit is. Have there been kind of calls in the community to lower or raise it? Because it's a lot of the concerns around challenges is around points that actually have more than the minimum deposited. So it'd be good to maybe look at, you know, the challenges on ones that are for the minimum versus more.
Yeah, and I think there are some proposals to adjust these, which I kind of wrapped into the discussion below around the proposal improvements, but we can certainly discuss that now as well. So I know I actually called for an increase in this, and this was a few weeks ago, because I was looking at gas prices for voting, and it looks like if you basically are using a standard gas price, if there's 4 or more people voting, you're breaking even or losing money on the vote. And I did notice that a lot of those 50-point challenges, the 50 token stakes challenges, are not getting as much attention in the votes, which I guess is expected to some degree. But like some of them look like they have 0 in the voting contract.
Maybe scroll down on your screen share to these parameters.
So, I mean, right, that's what I'm looking at right here, the min deposit.
I only see the top of the agenda on your screen share.
Oh, really? Okay, let me
Oh yeah, it was not moving your screen.
Sorry, I've been showing the parameters for a while, but I guess I'm lagging.
Yeah, it's still the same screen, the top of the agenda.
Maybe you can click min deposit on the table of contents on the left.
Okay, I clicked it. Anybody see min deposit?
No, it's just stuck at the agenda top, part 1.
Okay.
Can someone else share screen and then scroll with? I can't because I'm taking notes.
Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Okay, yeah, so where I was talking about kind of maybe, you know, I think it's important to kind of set a preliminary goal for now, but I don't know if we really need to dive into the discussion around increasing or decreasing it yet, unless you guys think otherwise. You know, I'm totally open to going a different way with the discussion, but that was kind of how I thought we would do this.
I think that the arguments for raising it were purely based around gas costs and the profitability of challenging and voting. And so I think that it makes sense, you know, from what we've heard so far from map users to kind of keep this just based on the gas costs. You've brought up like a kind of another, let's say, side effect of having a higher min deposit or a lower min deposit, which is the number of participants, which I think is, I kind of feel like if the number of participants is just greater than 0, excluding the challenger and point owner, then it's kind of good enough. Where I don't think that we necessarily need to always make sure that every challenge has, you know, 20 or more voters or something like that. I just like I pretty much think that people will do what makes economic sense for the first few votes, and then looking at kind of the goals of all the map users to increase the value of the network. You know, more people will get involved in a challenge where maybe that particular vote doesn't make sense, as we've seen recently with kind of the malicious challenges. So essentially, I mean, I'm kind of arguing that we should just focus on gas spend here until such a point where we're worried about the number of participants in votes, which I don't think we are at the moment.
So maybe like an action item would be to try to determine like what the average gas cost has been on votes, and or if we can try to stipulate like best practices for potentially using less gas, because we now have the salt is stored in your browser cache instantly. So if you pay the cheapest gas and just close the tab, your salt would be saved, and even if it takes a half hour for the vote to go through.
Yeah, I mean, that's been amazing. I did the math out in the thread where we had the suggestion to raise the min deposit, and I just think that people are overspending on gas, considering there's a few days where votes can be added to the mempool and then waiting to be picked up and added to a block.
Yeah, I think the price was like, if you pay 4 GWE or higher, then you know, which is a standard gas price that MetaMask would recommend, that is when it's not profitable. But if you actually crank it down to 1 GWE, it becomes more profitable, obviously. It's just that it takes, you know, it can take like 12 hours for the transaction to go through. But I mean, I agree with your point, Caleb, that only a few votes for these like really small POIs is fine, because it really should just be we don't need the whole community voting on every single one of these. It's more kind of the people that are directly involved with them, the owner of the point, or somebody who lives near that spot or something and knows that that is incorrect. Kind of the most important sort of stakeholders in that point only is fine to be voting. But yes, that's just something I noticed, and I proposed it out on Discourse a while ago. But I agree that there are ways to get around it by lowering gas price. So I don't think it's really the biggest problem right now. On the other end, I know there were some people that were actually talking about lowering this. So bringing it down to like even like a value as low as like 10 or 1 to just completely prevent challenging altogether unless somebody really has a problem with the point. I don't know if I agree with that either. I think 50 is a pretty good number for now. And I think we need more time to kind of see what happens. And I think also when it comes to the excessive challenging, we've been able to thwart some of that activity in other ways. So I don't know. Does anybody have any thoughts about potentially lowering the min deposit?
Coleman, so here when we're speaking about lowering the deposit, we should always think that the TCR model works that we need to have a certain balance to prevent spam, right? If the price is too cheap and nobody have economic incentive to challenge it, we incentivizing the spammers to put very low quality, a lot of very low quality data on the map.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I personally think 50 is still working, and that given either excessive staking, either due to confusions around proof of stake or just genuinely not checking in on your points, has been really the symptom of a lot of the challenge activity. And that if we can continue to educate people that they don't have to stake more than 50, and we see the average kind of stake come closer to 50, we maybe could better determine if that's a better min deposit. So I would say, like, if there are action items like looking at what gas is most on average, or how challenges are playing out that are just for the minimum versus others, and like what are the percent of points that have the minimum versus not.
Okay.
Yeah, I think thinking of the TCR model, we should think that all 3 actors, point creator, challenger, and voter, in some sort of a balance. That it's like there's like economic incentive for all of them, right, to perform their tasks. If it gets for one of the actors not profitable to perform a task, then we are more susceptible to the attacks on like one side or another. So I'm mostly on the page where the price should be, we should definitely think about the voters, that the price should be, that there's a still incentive, at least for like a few voters, to vote on that POI in case of the challenge.
I think Reagan was trying to say something.
Yeah, hi Ryan, it's Reagan here. Sorry for the disturbance, I'm just traveling. So I just wanted to mention that before we make any changes to the minimum deposit, we should also consider people who have not completed their proof of use until the sunset period. Like maybe after the sunset period, maybe we can have a change on the proposed number of tokens that can be staked. We should also consider that people have not completed, a certain number of users have not completed the proof of use.
You're breaking up slightly there. Could everyone hear what was said?
I couldn't really hear Reagan there.
I could hear some parts, which was about the proof of use period, to not change, if I understand correctly, and I don't know if this was specific to min deposit, but to not change certain aspects, or at least take into consideration that there's a big group of people that still haven't fulfilled proof of use. And that should be taken into consideration when discussing changing the smart contracts.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, I definitely think I agree with that. Okay, so just to kind of wrap up min deposit, the action items here and kind of the metric that we want to look at is the cost of voting at standard gas prices and at maybe minimum gas prices as well.
That, and I would say also like the differentiation between challenges with more than 50 versus those with 50, and to see how many points actually have the minimum versus not.
Okay. All right, so let's move on. So the apply stage len is the time in blocks in blocks during which an application can be challenged. So this is the amount of time that a new point of interest stays that blue color for the users of the map. But the time between you posting your POI and when it actually becomes a listee or when it actually becomes verified. So the goal here that we thought about was sort of the purpose this parameter has is highlighting new points to kind of call them out to potential challengers or curators of the map, so that they can see new points that need to be reviewed before becoming verified. So really what we want to do is have this period be long enough so that all points can be sufficiently reviewed by users, by cartographers, but not have it be sort of unreasonably too long. So one of the metrics that we thought about was the ratio of points that are challenged during this application stage and the ratio that are challenged after. And right now, I mean, I haven't done any real studying of this, but it seems like there's quite a bit of challenging going on after the application stage rather than during. So, you know, I'd like to see some data on this, but it almost feels like this could be lengthened to some degree. Does anybody else have any thoughts about that?
I presented it last week, and it's like, you know, 60% of points or something are being challenged that are 7 or more weeks old, and then basically all the other points are being challenged within the first few days that they hit the map. And what's going on with those older challenges is it's really based on the challenges that have more than the minimum stake, or the points that have more than the minimum stake get challenged after a long time, because they get curated over and over and over by people sorting the list of points by how much is staked to them. So, you know, I almost see this as being shortened personally. I think that during the application stage, it's harder to fix mistakes. It's harder to fix typos, and effectively for somebody who accidentally deposits too much or deposits the wrong amount or includes a typo in the point or something like that, it makes it extremely difficult to edit their point. And so I almost think what would be better is to have this as, you know, one day or maybe a few hours, or maybe removing it all together is maybe a little bit too much. But, you know, this is one of the areas where I kind of feel like it's not very friendly to new cartographers and anybody that makes a mistake in putting their point down.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I had this issue myself where while moving my mouse over to MetaMask, I accidentally clicked the map again. So the point got moved to a new area, but the transaction then went through. And then I have a 3-day period where someone can come challenge me. without being able to edit or remove it myself.
I mean, I think the other solution could be that we actually can add, you know, the functionality of removing the point during that stage, for example.
I guess I kind of feel like, you know, with removing, if you allow people to remove the point, then what is the purpose of having the application stage in the first place? And so it kind of, you know, going back to trying to define a goal for it, I kind of had a little bit of trouble with this one.
Well,
yeah.
There is a proposal to basically, after the initial application stage, to have a higher cost for challenging, for example. So that would give a new function to the application stage.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense to have some sort of signal about which points are new and haven't yet been reviewed, and then to maybe at some point adjust a parameter or a contract to make it more difficult to challenge verified points. That's my.
Yeah, I can understand that that kind of wish, and that makes sense. And I think without, you know, spending too much time on this, I think it's like kind of a UI feature to identify new points more so than a smart contract feature. And so I miss kind of what's behind. You know, unless we make it harder to challenge points that are past the application stage or whatever, I kind of missed the point of this so far. And yeah.
Caleb, you missed the point of having that stage, or? I think the intent of that stage and showing it in different color is to help curators, you know, to find the points that could be malicious right away, and kind of like under assumption that the green points are points that already been reviewed.
So I guess my point is that the points that are new can be identified in the UI, and the UI can kind of, you know, mark them blue or highlight them in some way that they're new. So I miss kind of why in the smart contract, you know, the application matters. And I take what Arthur said about having different parameters available to application points in the application stage versus the verified stage. But at the moment, you know, so in terms of defining a goal, that's why I'm having a bit of trouble with that aspect.
Well, I think maybe it's could be kind of something left over from the way these contracts were utilized for ad chain. So on ad chain, it's kind of like way more prestigious to be on the list and like a way bigger deal, so that the application period is a bit more important maybe for their purposes. And it's not really working out that great because the list is not growing. But given that we've took this primitive of the TCR, kind of came with all the parameters. So we can kind of how applying maybe kind of like a useless aspect here, because I agree that, yeah, you can from the UI filter new points so that curators can still discover them. But that's kind of like why it's part of the primitive. And it may be useful to keep if we add more kind of functionality.
I definitely think that I lean more towards keeping the application stage and adding some sort of defender's advantage feature at the smart contract level to verified points. I don't know. That's my opinion. And I guess we can kind of discuss that more as we get down into those specific proposals.
Yeah, maybe we can move to the next parameter.
Yeah. All right, so the commit period, this is the period during which voters can vote on a challenge, so where you can submit votes to a challenge. So the goal here is really to give participants or voters enough time to cast votes so that you maximize participation, but allow it to wrap up in a reasonable amount of time. And one of the metrics that we thought about was the ratio of challenges that a reasonably active foam user would be able to vote on. So looking at on-chain activity, an average sort of active user, whatever that means, we'd have to define. But you know, the ratio of challenges that that user would have been able to vote on, given the commit period. So, you know, does that jive? I mean, the goal, the metric, any proposals to increase, decrease? Does anybody have any thoughts there?
I don't have any like data to back this up, but it seems like it could be beneficial if it was slightly longer to just allow more time if it's a really controversial challenge to rally more participants. Maybe another metric is to look at how many votes come in towards the end of the vote, although that could also be people deliberately trying to like hide their contribution to the vote until the end.
The metric uses the term reasonably active, and that's kind of hard to define in maybe an agreeable way. So it's kind of a fuzzy, it's currently a very fuzzy metric. But I think, you know, I think this is kind of useful in a way that's saying, you know, if there's 100 people active in a given period, then we want to try to make sure as many of them have the chance to vote on a point as possible, or on a challenge as possible. And it feels fair in a way, but I don't know how we would, you know, measure reasonably active just yet. Yeah.
So I don't know if we're really ready to make any sort of proposals there, but it sounds like we need to kind of further define this and iterate to figure out how we measure it, and continue to think about, you know, if there's any sort of adjustment that we would like to make. So the reveal period, the final sort of period parameter, is the period during which voters reveal their votes. So it's how long do you have to actually reveal your votes. So the goal is to obviously give voters enough time to reveal their votes, but still have the reveal period wrap up in a reasonable time frame. A metric that we talked about to measure this is the ratio of challenges that could have ended early due to having 100% of the votes already revealed. I'm not sure if we have had any like that, and I'm not sure because again, I haven't dug into the data here. Another metric that we could use is the ratio of unrevealed to revealed votes in any given challenge.
Potential issue with that data metric is that some of the unrevealed votes may be those who have already determined they're on the losing side and are saving gas.
Yeah, we see a lot of that. There's been recently a couple of 100% of votes revealed.
Like, if I was to reveal if I was to, for example, submit a transaction with 1 gray, it might take me longer time to reveal my vote. So there's needs to be it's hard to determine the time to calculate the cutoff time for the ratio.
That's a good point. Yeah. There's another metric we could look at, which is kind of, I think Coleman, you pointed out an issue with 100% revealed, and so maybe we could say that could have ended early due to the revealed votes reaching, once the voting quorum is met, then the challenge could have technically ended early, and everyone could have saved their gas and so on and so forth. And so maybe rather than looking at the ratio of that, we can look at kind of the median time before that happens, assuming that it's less than the current reveal period. And if it's not less than the current reveal period, then, or we're not reaching that point of revealing enough votes to end the challenges, then maybe that's a case for it to be extended out a little bit.
So your idea is once we reach a certain quorum, we would kind of be able to say that this vote could have ended?
Yeah, like let's say that there are 100,000 unrevealed votes or 100,000 votes committed. Pretty much if everybody voted to keep the point, then it would only take 40,000 votes for the point to be kept. And so in that case, once 40,000 votes are revealed to keep the point, technically the challenge could end with the result never being changed.
Okay.
So once we reach that kind of period, then it indicates that we're just waiting for nothing and kind of wasting gas for nothing. So that might be the time that we measure that makes sense to measure.
Yeah, I think that makes sense too. Does anybody else have any thoughts or ideas around measuring the reveal period that way or any other way? Okay, let's move on. So the next parameter is the dispensation percentage, which is the percentage of the winnings in a challenge, either to the original staker of the POI or the challenger. So how much does the challenger or the original staker get versus how much did the voters on the winning side get? Right now that's 60-40 for challenger to voter. The goal here is to give challengers an incentive to challenge and to give voters an incentive to vote. So metrics that you could look at are voter participation based on either votes or tokens. I think we talked a little bit more about tokens making sense. And then the cost of challenges and cost of votes. If the cost of challenging is becomes higher than the cost of voting somehow, if there's, I guess, a change at the contract level and it requires more gas, then that would need to be adjusted. But I think, yeah, voter participation and maybe like challenge frequency or somehow challenge participation might be good metrics to measure.
I would say the other thing to keep in mind about potentially lowering the percent that goes to the challenger is that the more and more voters you have, the more and more that 40% is being divided. And so let's imagine it's like 80% to voters, 20% to challenger. It's like would take way more voters for the rewards to be diluted. And then the problem on the proposal of putting a slot, like a number of limited voters, is that a Sybil account could take up all the slots.
I think the idea of dilution of rewards, voting rewards, is a really good one. I don't have an immediate metric that comes to mind of what we could do there, but I want to give that one a little bit more thought. That makes a lot of sense. So as the number of voters increases and as the number of tokens being used increases, we kind of want to prevent voters from getting diluted too much.
Yeah, I think that in order to increase voter rewards, I had earlier proposed increasing the min deposit, which I kind of go back on, but this is another way to do that, and to at the same time potentially decrease the incentive to challenge on the map. And I know there's a lot of people in the community who are upset right now with some of the challenging that's been going on. So I think it could be it's something to definitely look at, because we might be able to sort of kill two birds with one stone in that regard. So we should definitely continue to track this one. All right, so vote quorum is the last parameter. So this is the, the amount of the percentage of tokens that need to be in favor of keeping a point on the map in order for it to stay on the map. So during a challenge, obviously.
Actually, you wording it a bit incorrect. It's the percent needed for the challenge to go through. So
okay.
Proposition is the challenge. And so for that proposition to pass, it needs a 60% quorum. So on the other hand, to keep the point, it needs 41%. Or
okay.
0.01%.
Yeah, I guess I read that wrong. So it's the opposite. It's the percentage of tokens in order to have a challenge go through. So voting true for a challenge.
Yeah.
So a goal is to obviously adjust the difficulty of removing points from the map. A metric is the success rate of the challenges. Any other ideas around goals or metrics there?
I just have some issue with using success rate, because we see like the success rate is like something like 85%, but then in terms of like total points challenge, it's more like 4 or 5%. So it's also important to kind of look at like how many points are even being challenged.
Yes, in the ideal scenario, the challenger is only challenging the points that are in the wrong location. So in that sense, you can have like 100%, success rate, which might be good for the TCR. So the success rate is not necessarily a bad metric.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Okay. All right, so that is 45 minutes already. I mean, I guess we can probably wrap up the parameters for now. And I would like to talk about the improvement proposal process. I think maybe since we only have about 10 minutes left, we can talk about that. And then if we have time after that, we can go back into the rest of the improvement proposals. But let's scroll down to part 3. So I had started sort of very high level thinking about how we could start putting together a more formalized process for these improvement proposals. And I think a good place to start is by building some sort of template to formalize the proposals. So I don't know if we can maybe base that on sort of the EIP specs, or if people have other ideas around how to kind of construct that. So I wanted to see if anybody wanted to take a lead on putting that together. I know we don't have too many community members in the call, but I see there's a few.
It's worth mentioning that user Ginny Zeus sent over what he dubs the FIP, which is the foam improvement proposal kind of template. I'm currently checking with him if this is public. If so, I can either share it, I'll share it to Discourse afterwards, but he already took at least like on his individual kind of took charge of starting such an improvement proposal standard that is actually quite developed. I'm very happy to share that with everyone on the call afterwards. Yeah. Yeah, if he is comfortable with us seeing that, I would love to share that so people can start reviewing that and giving any sort of suggestions and feedback. I think it's important that whatever kind of specification that we put together is community constructed and good enough that it's detailed enough, while at the same time kind of being friendly enough for maybe an average sort of discourse participant to put together a proposal. I just shared it. I saw that it was a public repo, so okay. I presumed that therefore it was okay to share.
I mean, I think this is pretty much like worked from other standards. So this document was derived heavily from Bitcoin's BIP, as well as Python. So this is probably a pretty good starting point for formal structure of collecting improvement proposals, but I haven't personally had the chance to get some detail. Yeah, I'll need to read through this as well. But I'm glad that somebody has taken, sort of stepped up and started thinking about that. So that's good to see. And then, as far as kind of how the rest of this process could go, I wanted to see if anybody had ideas around, what we do with proposals that we sort of get some consensus around on these workshop calls. Kind of how do we take it from there? My initial thinking, and we could do it any way that anyone wants, but was, the first step is people propose something on discourse. Second step is it gets aggregated and put into one of these lists for a workshop call. We sort of preliminarily discuss it. And then if there is some sort of consensus around that, which will, be hard to define, but we'll have to think about it. At that point, a volunteer, maybe whoever proposed the proposal or somebody else, can write up the spec and then come back to a later call, maybe a community workshop call again, raise the proposals kind of more as a second time and sort of argue for it. We'll hear any arguments against it, and then at that point we can, if there is strong consensus around the proposal, that person who has put the spec together can post it on GitHub. So that was my initial thinking, but I'm open to anyone else's suggestions. I obviously don't want to be the only one to put this together. It's something that we need lots of people to weigh in on. That sounds like a good, straightforward way of doing it, in my opinion. Paul is also asking if there can be an informal voting process, maybe something like signaling. Yeah, I like that idea. Maybe on, sort of the second time that it gets raised during a workshop call, like with the specification, there can be some sort of vote to really gauge consensus. Reagan's asking if we can use a Dowel model to arrive at consensus. So Reagan, what do you kind of mean when you say a Dowel model? Specifically, how would you envision that working?
Yeah, it's more like similar to what we have in Eragon or Colin model. Like, can you collaborate with an existing DAO model or create a separate DAO model for all the community proposals. And like for example, we discussed about the minimum stake and all those things can be governed and arrived at a consensus through the DAO model.
It would be nice to.
You're kind of cutting out again, but
there's a lot of background noise coming from your side, Reagan.
Yeah, sorry about that.
But,
no worries.
Yeah, I heard again. I cranked up my volume. Looking at Eragon, I think was one project, and seeing how they basically use the DAO to signal and vote on internal improvements. Right.
From what I saw at the DEF CON conference, that they released a product where you can create like a DAO or like a community page for your project, and you can like vote on proposals. They showed the interface. I guess we can try that, or at least look at it.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. We should definitely look at that. So I'll take that as a to-do on my end for sure. Okay. So if there's no other ideas kind of around a more formalized improvement proposal process, I think we can probably save the TCR adjustment and contract upgrade proposals for a later call, since we only have about 4 minutes left. Was there anything else that anyone wanted to bring up or discuss on this call before we end?
I think it's worth mentioning that the grant program that we announced contains a call also for things that are discussed here. I know it's in the potential funding possibilities kind of tab that you entered, but it may be worth checking out if people are interested in working on proposals. That is one of the things that is intended to be supported through the Twin Grants program.
Yeah, I think that on top of the grants, we also as a community need to start thinking about ways to fund our activities. Grants, that's one option. It would be great to sort of discover some others though as well, so that we can do different things and throw different things as a community. I'd love to have a mapathon at some point here in New York. At some point, if we decide to take any of these sort of TCR 2.0 proposals forward, it would be great to get some funding to actually outsource some of that development as well. So that's something that we should also start thinking about is funding initiatives. All right. That's all that I think, we can discuss in this 1 hour. We'll definitely have to have another call at some point to go over the rest of those proposals, sort of formal proposals. But thanks everybody for joining. Always free to reach out to me on Discourse or anywhere else. So thanks everybody.